Hi, Taurus. Good afternoon, and welcome to your reading. This reading already has my full attention, and honestly, this feels like a really important message. Let's see what the cards have to say. You've been quiet about it. That's the part that breaks my heart the most. You didn't scream. You didn't make a scene. You didn't drag anyone's name through the mud, even when they were dragging yours through the dirt with both hands. You absorbed it. You took the hit, and then the next hit, and then the one after that, and you stood there bleeding internally while smiling externally, and the world kept spinning as if nothing had happened because you made it look like nothing had happened. That's your gift and your curse, this extraordinary, almost inhuman ability to endure things quietly, to metabolize pain in private, to show up the next morning with your hair combed and your voice steady and your dignity wrapped around you like armor, while underneath it your entire being was screaming for someone, anyone, to see what was being done to you and say, enough, this is wrong, this stops now. Nobody said it. Not one person in the room where it was happening stood up and said what needed to be said. And the silence of the people who watched, the ones who saw and said nothing, the ones who knew and pretended they didn't, the ones who benefited from your suffering by simply not being the target of it, that silence became its own wound. Sometimes the deeper one, because the cruelty of the person who hurt you was at least visible, at least nameable, but the complicity of the ones who watched, that lived in a gray area you couldn't quite articulate, a place where betrayal wears the mask of neutrality and cowardice disguises itself as not wanting to get involved. I need you to hear something right now that is going to land in a place inside you that hasn't been touched in a very long time. What was done to you was seen, not by the people in the room, not by the ones who should have spoken up, but by something far older, far larger, far more invested in your well-being than any human observer could ever be. And that something, call it God, call it the divine, call it source, call it the intelligence woven into the fabric of existence itself, that something is not neutral. It is not sitting passively on a cloud, watching human cruelty unfold with detached philosophical interest. It is furious, not the petty, ego-driven fury that humans mistake for anger, a sacred fury, the kind that moves through the foundations of reality like tectonic pressure, slow and invisible until the moment it's not, until the moment the earth splits open and swallows what was built on corrupt ground. That fury has your name attached to it. It is fury on your behalf, and it is already in motion. Let me be clear about what I mean when I say you were tortured, because the word might feel too strong to some people hearing this, and I need to make sure we're not softening what happened to make it more palatable for comfortable ears. Torture isn't always physical. It isn't always loud. Some of the most devastating forms of torture are psychological, emotional, relational, carried out not with instruments but with words, with exclusion, with calculated campaigns of character destruction that leave no visible bruise but shatter a person's sense of reality, belonging, and self-worth. What was done to you was systematic. It wasn't a single incident. It wasn't a misunderstanding that got out of hand. It was a pattern, deliberate, sustained, and participated in by multiple people who each played their role in the architecture of your suffering. Some of them were active participants. They threw the stones. They crafted the lies. They weaponized information against you, twisted your words until they were unrecognizable, took the most innocent things you said or did, and reframed them as evidence of something dark. and others were passive participants, the audience members who watched the stoning without ever questioning who threw the first rock or why. Both groups are accountable. Both groups are being called to account. And neither group is prepared for what that accounting is going to look like. There's a specific quality to what happened that I want to name because I think it's the part that has wounded you most deeply, even more than the lies themselves. It's the injustice of being misrepresented by people who knew better. These weren't strangers making assumptions about you based on incomplete information. These were people who had access to the truth. People who sat at your table. People who received your kindness, your generosity, your vulnerability, your trust. They knew who you were. They had firsthand experience of your character, your heart, the way you show up for the people you care about, and they chose with full knowledge of the truth to construct a false version of you and present it to the world as if it were real. They took the raw material of your life and edited it maliciously, cutting out every frame that showed your goodness and splicing together a narrative that made you look like the villain in a story where you were actually the most wounded character. The audacity of that, the sacrilege of that. Taking someone's authentic self and remaking it into a monster to serve your own agenda, there is something profoundly unholy about that act, something that violates a law deeper than any legal system, a spiritual law that says you do not bear false witness against the innocent. And that law, unlike human laws, has no statute of limitations. It doesn't expire. It doesn't get reduced for good behavior. It waits and it collects. I want to talk about what this did to you internally, because the external damage, the lost relationships, the closed doors, the reputation that was poisoned, that's visible, that's quantifiable. But the internal damage is where the real devastation lives, and it's the part no one asks about because no one knows to ask. What happens to a person when they're consistently misrepresented is something like an identity earthquake. The ground beneath your sense of self begins to shake. Not because you believe the lies, you know the truth about who you are, but because the gap between how you see yourself and how others have been made to see you becomes so wide that you can't bridge it anymore. You walk into a room knowing you're kind, and the room has been told you're manipulative. You offer help knowing your intentions are genuine, and the recipients have been primed to suspect ulterior motives. You try to speak your truth and discover that the channels of communication have been contaminated, that anything you say will be filtered through a lens someone else installed, a lens designed to distort your light into something that looks like darkness. And eventually, even though you know who you are, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove it starts to erode something. Not your identity exactly, but your willingness to share it. You start withdrawing, withholding, becoming quieter, more guarded, less open, not because you've become a different person, but because the cost of being yourself in an environment that has been weaponized against you becomes too high to pay every single day. That withdrawal was noticed. And this is the part that might make your jaw tighten. It was used against you too. See? She's pulling away. She's isolating herself. She's acting differently, as if your natural response to being attacked was evidence of the very instability they accused you of. They created the wound and then pointed to your bleeding as proof that something was wrong with you. They built the cage and then described your pacing as madness. The circular logic of it, the inescapable trap of being judged for your reaction to the judgment that was perhaps the cruelest layer of all, because it left you with no viable response. Fight back, and you're aggressive, dramatic, proving their point. Stay silent, and your silence is interpreted as guilt, as admission, as the quiet compliance of someone who knows they've been caught. There was no correct move. Every option had been preemptively poisoned. And so you froze. Not out of weakness, out of a kind of spiritual paralysis that occurs when a genuinely good person realizes that the game has been rigged so thoroughly that playing it in any direction leads to the same outcome. But here's what they didn't account for. Here's the variable that no amount of human cleverness can control or predict. There's a force in this universe that remembers not the way humans remember selectively, conveniently, filtered through ego and self-interest. A perfect remembering, an accounting so thorough that it includes not just actions but intentions, not just words but the energy behind them, not just what was done but what was felt by the person it was done to. Every tear you cried alone. Every night you lay awake wondering what you did to deserve this. Every morning you had to reconstruct your sense of self from the rubble of someone else's lies. Every silent prayer you sent upward that was just a single word, why, repeated until it lost its shape and became just breath, just ache, just the sound of a human being who has been broken by injustice, asking the universe if it's paying attention. It was paying attention. Every single moment was recorded, and the record is now being reviewed. The divine fury I mentioned isn't anger the way you and I experience anger. It's not reactive or volatile or prone to burning out after the initial flare. It's structural. It's the universe itself refusing to allow an imbalance this severe to persist indefinitely. Think of it like a scale that has been held down on one side by force, the weight of lies, the weight of collective cruelty, the weight of unchallenged injustice, pressing down and down and down, while the other side, your side, the side of truth, hangs suspended in the air, ignored, dismissed, waiting. That scale has a breaking point. Every system of imbalance does. And the force that has been holding it down is not stronger than the force that demands equilibrium. It just had a head start. But gravity always wins. Truth always settles. And when this particular scale tips, and it is tipping right now, as you hear these words, the correction won't be proportional. It will be overcorrective. Because the universe doesn't just restore balance. It compensates. It adds weight to the side that was wronged, as if to say, not only were you right, but you will be so visibly, so undeniably, so publicly vindicated that no one will ever be able to question which side the truth was on. I want to describe what this vindication is going to look like, because I think you need to see it in your mind before you see it in your life. The truth about what happened to you is going to surface. Not because you force it, not because you launch a campaign of exposure or revenge or strategic information warfare. You won't have to do any of that. The truth is going to surface because the very people who participated in your destruction are going to be the ones who unravel the lie. Not intentionally, never intentionally. But the same dysfunction that allowed them to target you in the first place is going to turn inward. The alliance that was built on your suffering was never stable, because alliances built on cruelty never are. They're held together by a common enemy, and when that enemy is no longer accessible, when you've withdrawn enough that you're no longer providing fresh material for their narrative, they turn on each other. The same tongues that spoke against you will begin speaking against each other. The same willingness to distort the truth for personal advantage will manifest within the group, directed now at former allies. And in that internal collapse, the truth about you will emerge as collateral, not as the main event, but as a byproduct of their unraveling. Someone will say something, defending themselves in a conflict with another member of the group, and in their defense, they'll inadvertently reveal what was done to you. The lie will contradict itself. The story will develop holes. And the people on the periphery, the ones who heard the rumors, who accepted the distorted version without questioning it, who pulled away from you based on secondhand information, those people will begin to see the cracks. And once they see the cracks, the entire structure falls. There's someone specific, and I feel this very strongly, there's someone who was part of what happened to you, who is already experiencing the beginning of this unraveling. They're losing sleep. They're losing peace. They're experiencing a discomfort they can't attribute to anything specific, a persistent inner agitation that follows them from morning to night, that sits on their chest when they lie down, that whispers to them in quiet moments with a voice that sounds a lot like their own conscience finally waking from a long and convenient slumber. This person didn't lead the campaign against you, but they participated. They added their voice to the chorus. They could have spoken up for you and didn't. They could have told the truth and chose not to. And now the weight of that choice is settling into their body in a way that no distraction can alleviate. They're going to reach out, maybe to you directly, maybe to someone connected to you, but there's an attempt at contact coming from this person. And it's going to carry the unmistakable energy of someone who is trying to relieve their own conscience. How you respond is entirely your choice, and there is no wrong answer. But know that their reaching out is the first domino, and behind it, a long chain of revelations is lined up, each one knocking the next into motion. What the divine is demanding, and I use that word with full weight, demanding, not requesting, not suggesting, not gently encouraging, what is being demanded is the restoration of your name. Your name. Not your reputation, which is what others think of you. Your name, which is the energetic signature of who you actually are. Your name has been dragged through filth by people who weren't worthy of speaking it, and the spiritual consequence of that desecration is now being enforced, not by you. By something that considers your innocence sacred and their violation of it an offense against the order of existence itself. And the form this enforcement takes is not punishment in the way humans understand punishment. It's exposure. The most devastating consequence the universe can deliver to someone who built their position on lies is simply to turn the lights on. No added cruelty necessary, no revenge required. Just light, just visibility, just the sudden, blinding, inescapable experience of being seen for exactly what you are by the very people you performed for. That's what's happening to them. The lights are coming on, and what those lights reveal is not going to be pretty. I want to shift my focus back to you now, because as important as the vindication is, what matters more to me is what happens inside you as it unfolds. Because vindication, when it finally arrives, doesn't always feel the way you imagined it would. You've probably fantasized about this moment, and there's no shame in that. Every innocent person who was wronged fantasizes about being proven right. In the fantasy, vindication feels triumphant. Clean! Like the final scene of a movie where the truth comes out and the music swells and the hero stands tall while the villains slink away in defeat. But in reality, vindication often feels more complicated than that. There's relief, yes, but there's also a sadness, a deep, aching sadness that the vindication was necessary at all. That you had to spend time and energy and health defending a truth that should have been self-evident. That the people who claimed to know you could look at you and not see what was obvious. That trust, once a natural state, became something you had to ration and guard. The vindication doesn't erase those losses. It acknowledges them. And the acknowledgement, while healing, also opens the door to a grief, as you might have been postponing. The grief of realizing just how much was taken from you during the period when the lies had the floor. Let yourself grieve that. When the truth comes out and the relief washes through you, let the grief come too, They're not contradictory emotions, they're companions. They arrive together because justice without mourning is incomplete. You need to honor what was lost before you can fully step into what's being restored, the time. The relationships that were poisoned beyond repair, the opportunities that evaporated when your name was attached to a narrative you didn't author. The version of yourself that existed before the assault on your character, the more trusting version, the more open version, the version that didn't flinch when someone new got close because you hadn't yet learned that closeness could be weaponized. That version deserves a moment of silence. Acknowledgement that she existed and she was beautiful, and losing her was a real loss, even as the person you've become in her absence is stronger and wiser and more discerning than she ever was. There's something happening right now in the spiritual realm, and I don't use that phrase casually because I know how it sounds, but there is no other way to describe what I'm perceiving. There's an energy of what I can only call divine indignation surrounding your situation. And it's specifically focused on the people who knew you were innocent and chose the side of the aggressors anyway. Not the architects of the lies. They'll face their own reckoning, and it's already underway. I'm talking about the witnesses, the bystanders, the ones who sat in the audience while you were being crucified in your community, in your family, in your social circle, in whatever arena this played out, and did nothing, said nothing. Some of them even quietly agreed with the narrative because it was easier than questioning it, because questioning it would have required them to confront the aggressors, and they weren't brave enough for that. So they sacrificed you instead, threw you under the bus to avoid standing in front of it themselves. And now, the same force that's coming for the architects is coming for them, not with the same intensity, but with an unmistakable message. Complicity is not neutrality. Silence in the presence of injustice is a choice, and every choice has consequences. Some of these bystanders are going to come back to you. I see multiple people, not just one, multiple making their way back to your life over the coming period with varying degrees of awkwardness, regret, and sheepishness. Some will apologize. Some will just reappear without addressing what happened, hoping their presence will communicate what their words can't. Some will try to rewrite their own role in the story, claiming they never really believed the lies. They were just too afraid to speak up. They always knew you were innocent. And some of those claims will be partially true, and some will be entirely self-serving. And your job is not to sort through the sincerity of each person's return. Your job is to decide case by case whether you have room for them. Some of them you will welcome back, not because they deserve it, but because your heart is large enough to hold reconciliation, and you recognize that fear makes cowards of people who aren't inherently cruel. Others you will not welcome back, and that boundary will be neither vindictive nor dramatic. It will simply be the quiet, final closing of a door that you no longer have the energy or the interest to keep open. Both responses are valid. Both are holy. The divine doesn't demand that you forgive on anyone else's timeline or that you extend grace to people who aren't doing the work to earn it. If you've been showing up for the messages here on Mary's Angel Tarot, you know that the recurring thread in everything that comes through is the insistence that you stop sacrificing yourself on altars that other people built. And this moment, this season of vindication and restoration is perhaps the most important test of that lesson you'll ever face. Because the temptation when vindication arrives is to be gracious about it, to minimize what happened, to comfort the very people who need to sit in their discomfort, to say, it's okay, don't worry about it, when it is not okay and they should absolutely worry about it. Your instinct toward mercy is one of your most beautiful qualities, but mercy without discernment is just self-harm wearing a spiritual costume. You can be merciful and still require accountability. You can be forgiving and still maintain boundaries. You can wish someone well and still refuse to give them access to the inner rooms of your life that they proved they couldn't be trusted in. Grace is not an open door policy, it's a selective one. And the selections you make in this season are going to determine the quality of every relationship you have going forward. I want to tell you something about the honor that's being demanded on your name, because I think this concept might be unfamiliar to you. You've been so focused on surviving the assault that you haven't considered what comes after survival. What comes after is restoration. And restoration in the spiritual sense is not just the return of what was taken, it's elevation. The biblical principle applies here even if you're not religious. What the locusts ate is being returned, and it's being returned with interest. Your name, which was dragged through darkness, is about to be spoken in rooms you've never entered, by people you've never met, in contexts that would astonish you. Opportunities that were blocked by the contamination of your reputation are going to open, not because you campaigned for them or proved your innocence in some public forum, but because the energy around your name is shifting. The spiritual charge of it is being cleansed. And as that cleansing takes effect, the doors that were closed by lies will be opened by truth. Not the same doors, necessarily, but better ones. Doors you didn't even know existed. Doors that lead to spaces so aligned with your authentic self that walking through them will feel less like entering somewhere new and more like coming home. There's something I also want to address about the loneliness of innocence, because I don't think it gets talked about enough. Being the innocent one in a situation like this is isolating in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. Everyone assumes the person being accused has a support system, has allies, has someone in their corner. But when the accusation is crafted cleverly enough, when the narrative is controlled tightly enough, the innocent person often finds themselves standing completely alone. The very people who should have been their advocates have been turned against them. The truth, which should be self-evident, has been obscured by a fog of lies so thick that even reasonable people can't see through it. And the innocent person is left in the impossible position of trying to defend themselves against accusations that are unfalsifiable accusations rooted not in specific incidents but in vague impressions, whispered concerns, general feelings of something is off about them that are impossible to counter because they were never grounded in anything concrete to begin with. That loneliness, the particular loneliness of being innocent in a room that has decided you're guilty, is one of the most psychologically devastating experiences a human being can endure. It fractures your relationship with reality itself. You start wondering if maybe they're right. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe there's something wrong with you that everyone else can see and you can't. That thought, that poisonous, insidious, reality-distorting thought is the real damage, not the loss of relationships or reputation, as painful as those are. The real damage is the moment an innocent person begins to question their own innocence, the moment the lies penetrate deep enough to infect your self-perception. The moment you look in the mirror and instead of seeing the truth, you see a flicker of the monster they made you out to be. If that happened to you, if there were moments where you genuinely wondered if you were the one who was wrong, I need you to hear this with every cell of your being. You were not wrong. You are not what they said you are. You are not the distorted reflection they created. The doubt you felt was not your intuition telling you something, it was their programming taking root. And the fact that it took root speaks not to its truth, but to the sustained relentless pressure with which it was applied. A lie told once is easily dismissed. A lie told 100 times by multiple voices in multiple settings, with coordinated consistency, that lie begins to feel like truth simply through repetition. It's not truth. It was never truth. And the part of you that held on, even by a thread, even through the darkest moments of self-doubt, the part that whispered, "No, I know who I am," that part saved you. That part is the hero of this story, not the people who are about to be exposed, not the universe delivering its correction. You, the version of you that refused to be rewritten, that tiny, fierce, unextinguishable flame of self-knowledge that burned when everything else went dark. The honor being restored to your name isn't just about public perception, although that will shift dramatically. It's about the restoration of your relationship with yourself, the rebuilding of self-trust that was damaged by the sustained assault on your identity. The slow, tender process of looking in the mirror again and seeing only truth, not their version of you, not the doubt they installed, not the monster they illustrated, but you, the real one. The one who endured something that would have destroyed a lesser spirit and emerged not just intact but illuminated, because that's what suffering does to an innocent heart. It doesn't corrupt it. It clarifies it. It burns away everything that isn't essential and leaves behind a purity of purpose, a depth of compassion, a quality of strength that can only be forged in the exact kind of fire you've been walking through. I see you on the other side of this, and the person I see is not bitter, not hardened, not consumed by a desire for revenge or obsessed with watching the people who hurt you get what's coming to them. The person I see is free, genuinely, profoundly, almost shockingly free. Free in the way that only someone who has been unjustly imprisoned and then fully exonerated can be. There's a lightness to you on the other side of this that is almost impossible to describe. It's not the lightness of someone who has never suffered. It's the lightness of someone who has suffered completely, has been vindicated completely, and has released the entire experience into the hands of something greater than themselves. You're not carrying it anymore. You've set it down. And the space that opens up when you finally set down a burden you've been carrying for so long, that space is enormous. That space is where your new life begins. And the people who tortured you, they're about to discover something that every person who harms an innocent eventually learns. The protection that surrounds a pure heart is not passive. It doesn't just shield, it responds, it records. It waits for the precise moment when its response will be most instructive, and then it delivers a lesson so perfectly tailored to the transgressor's weaknesses that there is no possibility of avoidance. They will not be destroyed. Destruction would be too easy, too quick, too merciful for the kind of sustained cruelty they practiced. Instead, they will be educated. They will be given the experience of standing exactly where you stood, misunderstood, misrepresented, alone, watching people they trusted turn away based on stories that aren't true. Not as punishment, but as curriculum. Because the universe is, above all things, a teacher. And some lessons can only be learned by living them. You don't need to watch that lesson being delivered. You don't need to monitor their suffering to ensure it's sufficient. Your chapter in this story is the chapter of restoration, not retribution. The retribution belongs to forces far more precise and far more patient than any human capacity for revenge. Your energy, from this moment forward, belongs to the life that's opening before you, the life where your name is clean, your heart is known, your spirit is honored, and the truth about who you are speaks so loudly that no lie, no matter how cleverly constructed, can ever compete with it again. You survived the unsurvivable. You remained innocent in a system designed to make you guilty. And now the very heavens are rearranging themselves to ensure that your name, your truth, your light is placed where it always belonged, not in the shadows where your enemies buried it, but in the high and holy place where it shines so brightly that everyone who ever doubted you will have to shield their eyes. Stand up, lift your head. The season of your humiliation is over, and what's coming next is going to make every tear you cried in silence worth more than the people who caused them could ever comprehend. All right, thank you so much for watching Mary's Angel Tarot. Take care of your energy, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye.